All right, we're going to work through some examples of factoring trinomials with a leading coefficient of 1. So, our first example, factor x squared minus 10x plus 16. Now, I'm going to use the knowledge that I have given you in previous videos, so if you haven't seen those and you're not sure how to factor, go back and watch the videos before this. But I'm going to just start with an assumed knowledge that we know what we've done in the previous videos. And so, we have a leading coefficient of 1, which means that we can use the strategy that I showed in the previous videos, which is find two numbers that will add to negative 10, or our coefficient of x, and those same two numbers have to multiply to our constant term. Now, our first step in finding those two numbers is to find numbers that multiply to get 16. And so you'd factor 16 to find a couple of pairs of numbers that do that. So you get 1 and 16. Another set is 2 and 8, and 4 and 4. No other numbers can factor into 16, so these are all the factors of 16. And we want to pick out a set of two numbers that will also add to negative 10. And so let's check first. 4 and 4. Now, we have negative 10, which means that one or both of these numbers has to be negative, which is fine. But looking at 16, since 16 is positive, and we know that they have to multiply to get 16, that means that both of them are going to be negative. So just to keep that in mind, we're adding to a negative number, so one or both need to be negative, but we're multiplying to get a positive. And since a negative times a negative gives you a positive, that gives us the information that both of these numbers will have to be negative. And so, again, little things you can just pick out from observing these two numbers. So we know that any of these that we might choose all have to be negative because of that fact. So negative 4, add to negative 8. So let's have a different color. No. Negative 2 and negative 8 do add to negative 10. So, and they obviously multiply to 16 because they're factors, so that is our correct answer. And so right away, we have negative 2 and negative 8 add to negative 10. Negative 2 and negative 8 multiply to get positive 16, because a negative times a negative, again, is a positive. And full stop, once you find these two numbers are your factors. So our factors take the form x plus whatever number, we have negative 2, times x plus whatever number, our other number is negative 8. And a addition of a negative number just means subtraction, so you can rewrite this as x minus 2 times x minus 8. And those are our factors. Again, this is when we have a leading coefficient of 1, you find your two numbers that add to the coefficient of x, multiply to the constant term, and once you find those two numbers, those are your factors. Our next example, factor z minus 6 plus z squared. So this isn't in our traditional form, but that's completely fine because we can put it in the traditional form. We're going to use something called the commutative property, which means that as long as these two terms are separated by addition and subtraction, they can be rearranged however, because it's all going to be the same. So we can just rearrange this in the form that we're familiar with, making sure that we keep the signs the same. So negative 6, positive z squared. So now we're factoring this. So we want two numbers that will add to the coefficient of the z term, or there's the power of 1 term. And there's a 1 right here, so we want two numbers that will add to 1, because if you just have a variable, that means there's a 1 there, so the 1 of the variable. We also want those same two numbers to multiply to negative 6. And so, again, our first step in finding these two numbers is finding numbers that multiply to negative 6, or just 6, and we can deal with the negative once we get there. So 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Those are the only factors of 6, so it has to be one of these sets of numbers. Now keep in mind that one of these has to be negative. It can't be both, because a negative times a negative is a positive, and they both can't be positive because, again, a positive times a positive is a positive. So only one of these can be negative. So knowing that, we want to choose two numbers that multiply to negative 6 which is any, we're already going to choose that, but they have to add to positive 1 now. So looking at these, regardless of the combination, and you can test it out yourself, but regardless of the combination of positive and negative, 1 and 6 can never add to give you a positive 1. No matter if one's negative, one's positive, it doesn't matter. But 2 and 3, if you make the 2 negative, then 3 minus 2 is 1. And so there we go. We have 3 plus negative 2 equals 1, and 3 times negative 2 gives you negative 6. And again, once you find these numbers, you find your factors. So you have x plus 3 and x plus negative 2, which again, addition of a negative number is just subtraction, so you can write it like this. And we have our factors. Now, our third example is something we've seen in just the last video. It is s squared plus 4sr plus 4r squared. And if you remember, these will take factors of s plus some number r times s plus some other number r. And so, just like before though, we want two numbers that add to 4, the coefficient of the s and r, and those same two numbers that multiply to 4, which is the coefficient of the r squared. So, products of 4 are 1 and 4 and 2 and 2, or factors, sorry. Well, 1 and 4 can never add to give you 4, so it has to be 2 and 2. These are both positive, so 2's are both positive. So now our factors are going to take the form s plus m will be 2r times s plus n will also be 2 times r. And so that will be our answer for this one. And again, if you want to check, you can always FOIL this back out and see if you get the correct trinomial you started with. Our last one is a little bit trickier, and this is actually another topic for a different video where there's a shortcut for this, but we're going to just take the long way of, deriving that, I guess, to show you how that might work. But factor x squared minus 1. Now, if you'll notice, there's no x term, but we can pretend there is if we say x squared plus 0x minus 1. 0 times x will give you 0, so we can just pretend that the coefficient of x is 0. And now we can use our trick that says two numbers have to add to the coefficient of x, which is now 0, and those same two numbers have to multiply to our constant term, which is what, negative 1. Obviously, the factors of 1 are 1 and 1, and to make it negative, one of these has to be negative, and so by all of those logical steps, we have our answer. One of these has to be negative, so 1 times negative 1 is negative 1, and if you add 1 and negative 1, you get 0. So your factors take the form x plus 1 times x minus 1. And again, this is a shortcut that you'll see in a later video, but for now, these are your answers. And so I hope these examples helped going through any of your homework or anything like that. If you have any questions, leave a comment and I'll answer it. And I hope if this helped, you will like and subscribe.